Very special thanks to Cars of Somerset for providing the Audi RS6 in this review, of course, and as I always like to do, I've dropped a link to their current stock and, of course, the contact page on their website down in the video description. So if you want to check out a car like this one, maybe something else that they've got in stock, or even get them to source a car for you in the Somerset area, of course, click that link and check them out. Whenever the subject of ultimate daily driver performance cars arises, there tend to be three which, for me at least, for whatever reason, pop up in my mind first. And although technically my dream car, the Ferrari FF, falls into that category as well, the price is, let's just say, a little bit prohibitive for many people since it's still around a six-figure car. And there are lots of cars that you can bring up in that regard. But as I said, there are three primary ones for me. And I think part of the reason why is because they represent different ways of thinking. One is the Nissan GT-R, the other is the Porsche Panamera, and the third one is actually this, the Audi RS6, but not necessarily just this generation, but overall. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because I think that within those three options, there are two distinct different ways of thinking. You've got the Nissan GT-R side of things, and you've got the Porsche Panamera side. Now, of course, I've reviewed both of those cars here on the channel in various forms, so be sure to check those out to get more of an insight into what I'm talking about. But basically, the Nissan GT-R is one of those cars which is completely focused just on performance. Everything else is just a happy byproduct. It happens to look good, it happens to sound good, it happens to have a good amount of space and daily usability and be very driver forgiving and even comfortable for what it is. But that's not what the car's for. It's about sheer outright performance that is for a shockingly good price that you can genuinely use every day. On the other hand, you have the Panamera, a car which you'd kind of expect to be similar, since Porsche tends to also follow that route with many of the 911s, and also it's German, so you'd kind of expect it to some degree to have some of this Audi RS6 vibe, but it actually doesn't. The Panamera is, I would say, very Italian in its approach, but in the best ways. See, much like the Aston Martin Rapide or the Maserati Quattroporte, the Panamera takes the approach of being really good for performance, really practical as well with tons of space, and you can for sure use it every day. But unlike the GT-R, it puts a lot more effort into stuff like interior design, badge panache, and being not just fast, but really engaging and really fun. Now, the reason why I bring up those two different lines of thought is because that third option, for me at least, the RS6, falls into one of those camps a lot more than the other. And I think that that's important to note because it really does narrow down the kind of person who I believe will enjoy this car the most, certainly from an ownership experience. And that is that I think, fairly unequivocally, the RS6 falls into the Nissan GT-R camp. This car is not trying to be overtly stylish, or even necessarily super charismatic, or even passionate and fun through corners. It's a missile. Much like the GT-R, it's designed to just be otherworldly in terms of sheer performance, but also have a ton of space and a ton of daily practical use, almost as a byproduct of that. And even though you could argue with me on that point, and that's fair enough, you know, each person has their own opinion when it comes to performance cars, what thankfully is unarguable is that a performance missile is exactly what this thing is. Now, it's not quite as quick as a GT-R, but it's actually not that far off, because this generation, which is the C7 shape, which incidentally ran from 2013 to 2018, with a minor facelift and some updates, important updates actually, that I'm going to be talking about later on in the video in 2015, has incredible performance. Now, the only downside, in my opinion, to this car compared to its predecessor, the C6 generation, is that that car had a much more intriguing engine. That Lamborghini-derived V10 is just such a cool concept to put into a wagon, and I'm not going to talk about that too much because that'll be for its own video, but to me this V8 just isn't as cool or as badass as the idea of a V10 in a wagon. However, the reasons why they chose to do this are very obvious. Of course, technically it is a superior, more efficient performance engine, better emissions, better pound for pound, bang for buck performance from its size, from its cost, and from its tech. And performance it certainly has, because this 4-litre twin-turbo V8 unit puts out 552 horsepower and 516 pound-feet of torque. So it's much more torquey than most of its predecessors, and that is a key advantage when you're talking like GTR levels of brute performance, because power is great, but as I've talked about before, I love a car that has oodles of torque, because torque is just instantly usable. And it's that torque that allows this to be a literal supercar level performance machine, despite weighing just under 2 tons and being fairly large, to put it lightly. Now the 0 to 60 time on this is 3.9 seconds. That's legitimately supercar territory, and even though of course they limited the top speed to 155, you can get performance or dynamic packs which raise the limiter to about 175 or even 190. I don't know why you wouldn't just remove it completely, it seems kind of pedantic, but it shows at least some of the performance that this is really capable of. Now, if this one isn't quite fast enough for you, for whatever reason, there's even the quote-unquote Performance Edition, which is such a hilarious name. I personally wish they'd have called it the RS6 Plus, like they used to on the first generation car. But regardless, that version has just under 600 horsepower. The torque is raised to such a degree that it actually matches the horsepower on this one. 552 pound-feet. The 0 to 60 drops from 3.9 to 3.7, and it has that 190 mile an hour limiter anyway, plus a couple of small visual updates. Now of course you're going to be paying more for that performance edition, and the prices do range quite a lot on these cars. Now of course one of the main benefits of this generation is that it's already been replaced, and that always helps with finding a used bargain, because a lot of people want the latest and greatest, and the slightly older ones tend to get a little bit forgotten. With that under consideration, this car's lower end of the spectrum tends to be about £30,000 to £35,000 here in the UK. Now that's for a much earlier car, like a 2014 shape for example, and there is a key point. See, it's always important to look up, for instance, owner reviews or forums about a vehicle that you're looking at buying, and that's exactly what I like to do for you when I'm researching these reviews. So what's the case here? Well, I would actually recommend looking for instance, what this car in the video is, which is a 2015 shape or onward, because it had a minor facelift, which was more about fixing a couple of the issues that the car had. For example, the pre-facelift cars actually had a quite annoying and apparent wind whistle around the front windscreen, whereas Audi updated the car to have a double glazed windshield to eliminate that issue. You don't get that on the older car, and it is an update that you may want to do. You've also got other options like ceramic brakes, and we're going to talk about some of the things that you need to look out for on one of these cars because, spoiler alert, to the surprise of no one, it's very expensive to fix one of these if it does break. Now, I mentioned that the lower end of the price spectrum is about 30 to 35 grand, and a lot of those do tend to be the slightly older models, so be cautious on that. If you can afford to get a 2015 or onward, that's the one that I would recommend going for. And for an absolute latest and greatest, maybe even with the performance pack, so around the 2018 car, you're looking more like 60 grand. So it's actually kept quite a lot of value for a car that's already been replaced, and that's a good sign. Now, in terms of the genuine daily use side of things, such as economy, space, comfort, practicality, how does the car actually fare? Because it's already got a huge advantage over something like a Panamera or a GTR in terms of just space. 5-door hatch, huge boot, as you'll have seen at the start of the video. The rear loading space is massive. You can drop the rear seats as well. It has incredible amounts of space in the back. But what about stuff like economy as well? Now, of course, a lot of people won't care as much about that, but as I said, I do. I find it impressive if a car can be fast and economical as well, because that takes a lot more effort from an engineering point of view. Well, Audi actually did a really good job with this car, because considering that it weighs about as much as a large Mercedes limo and has the power levels of a Bentley Continental GT, well, actually the economy is remarkably good. And part of that is, of course, the efficiency benefits of that updated engine. Now, they rate it officially at 21 to the gallon around town, 38 on the highway, and a really impressive average of 29. Those are much higher numbers than you might expect. Now, in reality, according to, again, owners, you're looking at more like the low to sometimes high 28 region. That's still not bad for a car with this kind of performance. Again, 3.9 seconds to 60. In a 2-ton car, that's actually really good. I was really impressed by that economy. In terms of space, well, this is a crucial way in which this car compares very, very favourably to the other Audi RS model which I reviewed here on the channel a couple of months back, and that was, of course, the RS4 Avant. Just like this car, only available as a wagon, and it's a pretty interesting comparison between the two because I find that this car, to put it lightly, almost makes the RS4 feel completely pointless. It's everything that car is, except this one does it better in every way. In my opinion, it looks better, it's bigger, has more space, way more performance. Just across the board, this is a more impressive car. And space is one of the key differences that you will notice between an RS4 and this one. Now, in terms of interior space, of course it's always important for me, and it was fantastic. Put simply, in this car, there's tons of room in the back. As I said, the trunk space is almost endless, and even up front, it's fantastic. You can adjust the seats as much as you need to, the headroom is great, it's got a lovely panoramic roof. It's a nice place to be, it's very comfortable, the seats look great and feel great as well. It's smooth as well. Now, on the subject of how the car feels, this is one of the things that you need to be looking out for when potentially buying one. Because, for instance, the larger 21-inch wheels can warp, they're fairly easy to curb as well, so you will want to make sure that you, of course, drive it appropriately, and also keep a lookout for that when buying one. For instance, with the brakes warping, you will notice that if you test drive the car, get it up around 60 to 80 miles an hour, and feel for any juddering or wobbles in the steering, and also in the brake pedal under heavy deceleration. So those are the kind of things that you immediately want to be looking out for. Of course, the curbing would be fairly apparent, the wheels are very expensive, as are many of the things that you'll need to do to this car if it does break, and according to some other research that I found online, it seems that if the car does have mechanical or engineering related issues, they tend to be more transmission issues or sometimes fuel injectors. So again, look into the car's history, check its fault codes if you can, that kind of stuff, just to keep on top of it. Make sure it's been loved in the past, as you pretty much would with any performance car. The key is try and find the best condition one, the most loved one that you can, because then you'll have less issues to worry about in the future. And of course, as I mentioned earlier on, try if at all possible to get a 2015 or onward car because of that double glazed window advantage as well for the noise levels. My overall verdict on this car are actually that, academically speaking, with no thought to personal preference, no thought to opinions, just based on pure facts, the numbers, what it can do, what it's capable of, and how it feels, it's brilliant. I mean, put simply, it's an absolutely fantastic car in every way. It looks great, it sounds great, the handling is good. Of course, it's a big 2-ton wagon, so don't expect it to get through corners like a Porsche Boxster, but for what it is, it's fantastic through corners in my opinion. Of course, the straight line performance is absolutely phenomenal, the economy is surprisingly good, the space is fantastic, and unlike a lot of previous generation high-performance cars, especially from Germany, hint hint, it actually feels every bit as exotic as you would want it to. It looks, feels, and sounds the part. It is essentially a supercar that happens to be a wagon. So across the board, it's a very impressive car. My personal note is that I would never buy one of these, but the reason why has nothing to do with how good it is. I think, as I said, it is brilliant. It's actually the same reason why I would never buy a Nissan GT-R. It's simply not my kind of car. See, out of the 3 cars that I mentioned, I 100% fall on the Panamera side, the Aston Martin Rapide side, the Maserati Quattroporte side, because I do like the car that has more of a focus on the fun, the passion, the charisma, and the style. So if that sounds like you as well, you might want to consider something like a Panamera over an RS6. If, however, you've driven or love the idea of a Porsche 911 or a Nissan GT-R, but as a wagon, then the RS6 very could well be the car for you. keep an eye out for those things that I mentioned, and of course, as I always like to say in these reviews, if you're watching this video and you are a current owner of one, or if you used to own one, maybe even a different generation like the V10 car for example, drop your stories, warnings, and just general thoughts down below. Did you love your time with the car? Or even if you're not an owner, if you're just one of my regular viewers, what do you think of the car? Do you like it? Is it the kind of thing you'd be interested in? Tell me all of that down below, of course, and if you want to check out my review of the aforementioned RS4, the Nissan GTR, the Porsche Panamera GTS, etc., you can find all of those reviews by clicking right here on screen into that Beards and Cars playlist. But until next time, I'll see you then, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.